The lights dimmed, the velvet curtain swept aside, and the first frame flickered onto the screen. I shifted in my seat, my legs crossed too tightly beneath me, knees locked, heart ticking with the rhythm of the pre-film hush. Around me, the room buzzed with breathless anticipation, the kind that comes just before something begins or before something ends. This was the Portland Queer Film Fest, and tonight's headliner was a short film called Sky Between Us. Written and directed by Raina Vale. She used to sleep with her head on my stomach and whisper ideas like that, poetic, aching little fragments of titles. I remember once I joked, "You should write about us someday." She had blinked slowly and said, "Maybe I will." I didn't think she meant it like this. The opening scene was quiet, a woman waiting on a train platform. Her fingers curled around a paper cup of black coffee, a cold morning. The scarf she wore, blue with silver stars, was the same one I wore the first day Raina and I met outside the Hawthorne station. I remembered the burn of coffee on my tongue because I hadn't let it cool, because I was nervous. I remembered how Raina said, "You look like you fell out of a Virginia Woolf novel." On screen, the woman said the same line, same tone, same smile. I sat forward in my seat. The scenes kept rolling, each one like a page turned from my private diary. The indie bookstore date, the little argument over whether real love needed silence or conversation, the dance in the kitchen the night the power went out. My breath caught at that one. I had written about it, word for word, in my journal. The one I tied shut with a red ribbon, the ribbon that had gone missing. The camera lingered on a necklace, a small silver leaf pressed into a chain. Raina had given me one just like it, on our 3rd anniversary. She'd said it meant growth that survives fall. My throat burned. I wanted to stand, to scream, to walk out, but I couldn't move. My hands lay cold and stiff in my lap, fingers twisting into the hem of my coat. My coat, the gray wool one I used to wear every fall. The same coat the character on screen wore now as she stood in the rain. Saying goodbye at a train station, when the end credits began to roll, slow and soulful, soundtracked by some indie ballad, I heard the first applause begin, soft at first. Then louder, a rising tide of approval. Raina stepped onto the stage, spotlight catching the gold shimmer of her blazer. She looked stunning, collected, confident, like someone who had finally stepped into her greatness. She took the mic. "This film was deeply personal," she said. "It's fiction, of course, but inspired by love, loss, and becoming." The audience clapped harder. Someone whistled. Cameras flashed out fiction. I looked down at my knees. My hands were still shaking. The red ribbon, I had found it in the trash months ago, frayed, dirty, almost buried beneath a pile of torn sketches. At the time, I thought maybe it had just slipped, got mixed up with Raina's moodboard chaos. But now I saw it clearly. She hadn't borrowed my journals. She'd mined them. I felt dizzy. My memory tangled with the moving images I just watched, trying to sort which belonged to me and which she had edited into something new. But it was all mine. All the most private moments, stripped, simplified, and reshaped into art that had no trace of my name. It wasn't even the cheating that hurt most anymore. It was this. I wasn't a lover. I wasn't even a person. I was source material. As the audience stood for a full ovation, I stayed seated. I couldn't move. My spine locked in place. My jaw clenched. Raina's eyes swept the crowd briefly and passed over me like I was just another stranger. Which, I suppose, I was now. The applause echoed in my ears long after the lights came back up. People turned to each other, whispering how raw and real the film was. I wanted to tell them the rawness belonged to me, that the realness had once lived in my home, in my bed, and my ribcage. Instead, I stood slowly and walked out without looking back. Outside, the autumn air slapped me across the face. I welcomed it. The marquee still glowed behind me. Sky Between Us by Raina Vale. I stood there, wrapped in that ugly feeling, the trail sharpened by applause. 1,000 hands had clapped for her for my story, and I had nowhere to put. That pain dot, but deep in my coat pocket, my fingers found a pen. I didn't remember putting it there, Dot, and that's when the thought whispered through me. She may have stolen my story. But I still know how it ends, Dot, and this time I'd write it myself. 3 years earlier, on a Tuesday soaked in sideways rain, Raina Vale walked into my life with wet curls, paint-flecked boots, and a question about Adrian Rich. I was behind the front counter at my bookshop, binding an old copy of Diving Into. The wreck that someone had returned with its spine cracked in half. The bell above the door tinkled. I looked up, and there she was. Rain in her lashes, a leather satchel slung across her shoulder, camera peeking out like a secret she didn't. Browse. She made a beeline for the poetry shelf as if drawn by instinct. Do you have anything that bleeds without begging? She asked me without preamble, finger trailing over the spines. Her voice had a velvet rasp to it, tired maybe, or just full of stories. Adrian Rich, I said, not missing a beat. Third shelf down, behind the bishop. She turned, grinned, and just like that, the fire began. Dot, we fell fast. I told myself it was fate, or chemistry, or that invisible pull some people give off like gravity. Raina was chaos with charm. A filmmaker between gigs, as she called it. She had a box of half-finished scripts and a hard drive full of almost. But when she spoke about stories, her eyes lit up like matches. She talked about storytelling like it was religion. And I, quiet bookshop Olivia, was instantly devout. She would show up at the shop with coffee and scribbled storyboards. We'd sit cross-legged in the poetry aisle, her fingers painting images in the air scenes, shots, dialogue, while I helped string them into something coherent. She called me her calm storm. I called her my spark. When she couldn't pay rent, I offered her my spare room. That turned into shared mornings. That turned into toothbrushes beside each other and my closet slowly absorbing her denim jackets and oversized sweaters. Dot at first. The love was honest. Messy, sure, but warm. Late-night drives. Indie film marathons. Handwritten notes tucked in books. Raina would read lines aloud in bed and call me her anchor, her compass, her quiet genius. And I believed her, but even sparks burn. The signs started small, just glimmers of smoke. A waitress's number folded into her coat pocket. Raina saying it was a mistake. Me believing her. Nights she said she was at a shoot but didn't answer text. Excuses about bad signal or drained batteries. Dot, and then the dismissals. You're too soft sometimes, Liv. All this whispery poetry, it's not real pain. Or no one's going to read about a woman in a bookshop. That's not cinema. And once, worst of all, you don't understand the hustle. You've never had to fight for art. That one stung. Because I had fought. I fought every time I swallowed a feeling instead of voicing it. I fought every time I told my mother I was fine, even when the ache in my chest kept me up at night. I fought for her, for us, with silence, with sacrifice. But Raina didn't see that kind of fight. She only saw fire when it flared. I stopped writing. Dot at first. It was because I wanted to give her space. She was the real artist in the house. I was just the support beam. But eventually, the words didn't come even when I tried. My journals gathered dust, my pens dried out. It was as if my voice curled in on itself, too afraid to interrupt. Friends stopped inviting me to dinners, said I was always making excuses. My best friend Erin said Raina was blinding me, that she didn't feel safe around her, the sharpness, the temper, the control. I told her she didn't understand queer relationships. That passion sometimes looked like volatility, but I was lying, even to myself. I watched my mother's calls go unanswered. I canceled our Sunday calls too often. She once left me a voicemail that said, "I don't know who I'm talking to anymore, but I hope she finds her way back." Still, I stayed, because when Raina was good, she was golden. She'd kiss my shoulder while I brewed tea, or sit behind me and braid my hair, whispering scenes she dreamt about in her sleep. She made me feel chosen, needed, necessary. And isn't that love? I asked myself. Isn't that what they don't tell you about queer love? How messy it can be, how hard you have to work to protect it? So I worked until one night, lying in bed, she turned toward me and said softly, "Can I read your old journals?" I blinked. "Why?" "You write like the sky thinks," she murmured. "I need that voice in my film, something honest." Something in me hesitated. Those pages were sacred. They held the parts of me I couldn't say aloud. Grief, shame, dreams I never pursued. The feeling of not being enough. But when she looked at me, eyes wide and serious, I thought, this is what love does. It shares the private. It opens the locked doors. So I nodded. "Okay, just be gentle with them," she smiled, kissed me on the forehead. "Of course." I tied them with a red ribbon and handed them over. I never saw them again. Weeks passed. She said she was reading them slowly, letting them sink in. Then the ribbon disappeared. I asked once, she brushed it off. "Probably in the car. I'll check later." I didn't press. I wanted to believe the best of her. But inside something folded. A quiet ache, like the first bend in a tree branch before the snap. Looking back now, I can see it clear as crystal. This wasn't love. It was a transaction. I gave and gave. She took and took. And I convinced myself that burning was the same as warmth. It wasn't. Sometimes I think about that fire, how it started so small. Just a spark in the poetry aisle, but fires grow. And eventually, when you don't stop them, they become floods. It wasn't the lipstick on a collar, or a stranger's scent in our sheets, or some half-heard rumor murmured behind my back. It was silence, the kind of silence that buzzes, grows teeth, fills a house like smoke, invisible until you're choking. Raina had been in production mode for weeks. That was her phrase. It meant the rest of the world stopped existing. She'd lock herself in the backroom studio, a glorified storage closet we painted seafoam green one weekend, and emerge only for coffee or cigarettes. Sometimes not even for those. She stopped asking how my day went. I stopped offering. The air between us thinned like tissue. Still I waited, believed it would pass. That art came with distance. That creation required mess. But that afternoon, I was cleaning. It was just dusting. A task for my hands because my heart had been still too long. I decided to tackle the back shelf in the hallway, the one behind her collection of secondhand film books and broken vintage cameras. I hadn't touched it in months. That's when I saw it, tucked sideways between Rebel Without a Crew and a dusty Super 8 manual, a phone, older model, no case. No fingerprints. Hidden like a secret, slotted into darkness. My first instinct was confusion. My second was dread. I turned it on. No password. Just a screen that blinked awake like it had been waiting for me. The messages were still open. A name at the top, Marlowe, no last name. No photo. Just words, explicit, shameless words. Photos, voice notes. Conversations from weeks, months, maybe. The most recent one timestamped from the night she'd told me she was editing all night, headphones on, in the zone. "I wish I was under your desk right now." She still doesn't suspect a thing. She made me tea again this morning. Thinks that fixes distance. It's like she's from another century. All journals and silence. I need Fire. I scrolled further, found a voice note. My finger hovered, then tapped play. Raina's voice. Low, laughing. Casual in that cool way only certain people know how to wield. Olivia's like a blank wall I can project on. She used to write things that made me cry. Now she just rearranges tea tins like it's a calling. I don't even know what we are anymore. Something in me folded. My knees went soft. I sat down on the floor, the phone still glowing in my hand. I stared at the words, reading them again and again as if they would change, as if context might soften them. But there was no nuance, no misunderstanding. She wasn't just cheating, she was mocking me, dismantling me, piece by careful piece, behind a curtain of her genius. That night, she came home at midnight. Smelled like bourbon and eucalyptus. I was sitting on the couch, lights off, phone in hand. When she saw it, she froze. Just for a second, I said nothing at first. Just looked at her, then at the phone. Then I whispered, "How long?" She didn't answer. "Raina," I said, voice cracking. "How long?" She stepped forward, arms crossed like armor. "Why does it matter?" My breath caught. "Because I gave you everything. Because I trusted you." She shrugged. Actually shrugged, and then she said it, no tremble. No remorse. Just this hollow thing she'd been holding in her mouth for who knows how long. "You gave up on yourself, Olivia. You stopped being interesting." It sliced through me like broken glass. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because something in me shattered so cleanly it made a sound. "So you replaced me with someone who thinks you're a god?" Her jaw tightened. Marlo listens. She challenges me. "You just preserve me. I loved you. That's not the same thing." We stared at each other. Her eyes were empty. Mine were overflowing. She didn't apologize. Not once. She moved out 2 days later. She took the couch, her camera, her laptop, a dozen old film books. She took the red scarf I knitted her one winter, though she never wore it. She took our shared vinyls, the speakers, a single bottle of wine from the rack, and my journals. All of them, gone from the top shelf where I had recently stacked them, the ones with my initials on the inside cover, ink bleeding slightly through the page. When I noticed, I stood in that empty corner of the living room and felt nothing, not anger. Not yet, just absence. She didn't leave a note. Didn't say goodbye. The walls looked bare. The house felt like a museum of things no longer alive. I wandered through it like a ghost. The next few days blurred. I stopped opening the shop. The phone rang, customers, deliveries, Aaron calling more than once. I didn't pick up. My landlord left a voicemail. Something about overdue rent. My name echoed through the receiver like it didn't belong to me. I opened the fridge once and stared at a head of wilting lettuce and a bottle of almond milk. I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. I just sat at the kitchen table with a cold mug of tea, staring out the window at a life that no longer included me. My mother texted, "I know something's wrong. Please call me. I love you." I couldn't respond. Couldn't find words that wouldn't spill blood. For the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to feel erased. Like I'd been rewritten by someone else's hand. Reduced to footnotes in my own home. On the 5th day, I walked into the study. The same one where she used to write on the floor with headphones in. Where I once caught her dancing alone at 3 a.m. in the glow of the desk lamp, whispering lines to herself like spells. It was empty now. Except for the smallest notebook, tucked in the corner of the shelf. New. Unused. I sat in the desk chair and opened it. The first page stared back at me, blanked out. My fingers trembled as I picked up a pen. I didn't write a poem. Not a love letter. Not even a diary entry. I wrote a sentence. She stole my story, but I still know the truth. I stared at it. It wasn't enough. But it was something. It was proof. but somewhere inside me, buried beneath the silence. I was still here, still thinking, still surviving, still writing, and in that quiet moment, pen against page, I made myself a promise. If Raina thought I was too soft to fight back, she was about to learn just how sharp silence could be. I left Portland on a Tuesday morning with a single suitcase, a thermos of cold tea, and no forwarding address. The bookstore keys jingled in my pocket, but I didn't leave them with anyone. Just locked the doors and slid the closed sign into place one last time. I didn't even glance back at the window where I'd once painted "Stories live here" in looping blue letters. The words felt like a lie now, or maybe just someone else's dream. The town I drove to didn't have a name most people would recognize. It sat 2 hours west of the city, near the coast, wrapped in pine and fog and wind that smelled like salt and stories left unsaid. Found a cabin through a friend of a friend who answered emails with one-word replies and didn't ask questions. The place had creaky floors, a leaky faucet, and no cell signal unless you climbed the hill behind the property. And tilted your phone toward the C dot, it was perfect. I introduced myself to the neighbors as Liv. Just Liv. No last name. No partner. No heartbreak stitched into my sentences. They didn't ask. Small towns are good like that. They respect silence the way cities never learn to. The first few days passed in silence. No phone calls. No noise. No one saying my name. Like it belonged to someone else. I swept the porch, walked the trails that wound along the cliffs, watched gulls skim the water. I stood at the edge of the world most mornings, wrapped in a thrifted cardigan, clutching a chipped mug of coffee, trying to remember what it felt like to be inside my own body. I baked bread, even though it came out dense and awkward. I cleaned the dusty shelves and started organizing the cabin's collection of abandoned paperbacks. I read again, not to escape, but to feel something. Rich, heavy stories. Ones that didn't beg for an audience. And somewhere between the flour on my hands and the sea air in my lungs, the silence stopped hurting. It began to heal. By the third week, I walked into the little town library and asked if they needed volunteers. The woman behind the counter, Greta, white hair in a bun, eyes sharp as vinegar, gave me a once-over and said, "You look like someone who knows how to alphabetize." That's how it started. I shelved books, repaired bindings, cleaned out the children's section. A few days later, I offered to teach a writing workshop on Thursday evenings. Greta raised a brow, but not a dot the first week. Only 2 people showed. Up by the third week, there were 7. One of them was May. She was 17, wore black hoodies, even in the heat, and scribbled poems in the margins of grocery receipts. She didn't say much at first, just stared at the floor and flinched when anyone complimented her work. But her writing, it burned out sad and sharp and too wise for her age. She reminded me of myself at 18. Before I buried my voice under someone else's spotlight, over time she started staying after class, asking questions, laughing sometimes. One night she said, "I didn't think women like you lived out here with thoughts." I smiled. "We hide until we're ready to be found." It was a Tuesday. When I saw the article, I was sitting in the corner cafe, thumbing through the local paper when a glossy magazine tucked inside caught my eye. I flipped it open, more out of habit than interest, and froze. There she was, Raina Vale, smiling, posed beneath bold letters that read "The New Voice of Queer Cinema." The headline, "Raw, Real, Revolutionary." The caption, her award-winning film "Sky Between Us" is inspired by real events. I laughed. Out loud. The woman at the next table looked up. I waved a dismissive hand and folded the page in half. It didn't hurt. Not like it used to. Instead, I felt a strange calm wash over me. A clarity. She hadn't erased me. She duplicated me. She took my story, my words, my heartbeat, and rebranded them as art. But no matter how many festivals she conquered, she couldn't replicate the soul behind those stories because she didn't live them. I did. That night, I climbed the cabin. The moon was swollen and orange, the kind that looks close enough to touch. I sat cross-legged in the grass, notebook in hand, not a journal. A manuscript. The first page was already filled. The title, The Woman Who Watched Her Story Walk Away. I wrote for hours, fingers aching, pages fluttering in the wind. The words came fast now, not because I was chasing them, but because I'd stopped running from myself. The book wasn't about RAYNA. Not really. It was about loss. About ownership. About women like me, quiet, steady, easily overlooked, who are too often used as scaffolding for someone else's success. It was about how a voice, even stolen, never really disappears. It waits. Underground. Patient. Until it grows back like wildflowers through broken pavement. Weeks passed. My manuscript grew fatter. My lungs stronger. May told me I should publish. Greta agreed. I sent it to a small indie publisher under the name Elaine. No expectations. No bio. Just the truth. They emailed me 3 weeks later. The subject line, "We need to talk." The editor said it was the most powerful thing she'd read in years. "It's not just a story," she wrote. "It's a reclamation." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I brewed a cup of tea, wrote back yes, and watched the steam rise like breath from something finally alive. I wasn't Olivia Vale anymore. Not to them. Not even to me. I was Liv. Just Liv. Not someone's muse. Not a blank wall. Not a footnote. I was the story. And this time I'd write the ending. The cabin smelled like salt and pine the morning Olivia began. Not began as in started. She'd scribbled here and there, pages folded into cookbooks, half-formed lines on receipts, margins full of grief. But today was different. She cleared the table, lit a single candle, made tea strong enough to hold a pen upright. Then she opened a blank document on the old laptop that still carried a crack down its side. A scar from a night she no longer tried to forget. At the top of the page, she typed the title, "The Woman Who Watched Her Story Walk Away." The cursor blinked. She stared. Then she began. She wasn't a villain, not at first. She was a mirror. And I kept looking into her until I forgot what I looked like without her reflection. The words came like rain after drought, steady, soft, but undeniable, not a flood. Acclaiming this wasn't a revenge story. Not really. It was an anatomy. She wrote the first draft in 7 weeks. Her fingers sore, her back aching, her heart stitched open. She didn't just tell what Raina did. She told what she allowed. The way she shrank, folded herself in half to be someone else's poetry. The way she silenced her own voice, thinking love was volume and suffering meant depth. No one was spared. Even herself, and that's what made it real. She titled the document, "Oh, Lame Manuscript V1, and submitted it to 3 indie publishers under a new email address. Her real name stripped away like the final costume in a bad play. She didn't expect much, maybe silence, maybe a polite rejection. 2 weeks later, the phone rang. "Hi, is this Elaine?" The voice said, warm, curious. "Yes," she said, the word foreign on her tongue. "I don't usually call directly. But we've never read anything like this. Your voice, God, your voice. It's like you've set your own bones on the page. Can we talk about acquiring this?" She didn't cry until after she hung up, then she did. Not out of grief, but out of return. A sense that somewhere inside her, a lantern had been relit. She was back. She was visible. She was hers again. The legal documents came next. Not with rage, not with fanfare. Just facts. The same way Raina used to slice truth into fiction and call it art, a cease and desist. Copyright infringement, plagiarism, emotional and creative damages. Her attorney, a fierce, Elegant woman named Maria who once taught copyright law to a room of men who underestimated her, delivered the letter with precision. Olivia didn't send a message to Raina. She didn't need to. The envelope was the message, and the silence that followed. That was the reply. Weeks passed. Momentum built. The publisher moved fast. Galley proofs, marketing plans, readings. The title stayed. The woman who watched her story walk away. Some editors suggested softening it, maybe something metaphorical. But Olivia refused. This is the title, she said. This is the truth. They agreed. She was invited to read in Portland, her first public appearance since she left. She almost said no, but then she thought of her younger self, the girl behind the counter in the bookstore, writing poems. In margins, apologizing for her softness. She booked the train ticket. Wore a navy dress, a sharp green coat. Her mother's ring, now polished, warm, and in her tote bag, 2 things, a signed contract, and a single copy of the journal she had. Rewritten into art. The bookstore looked the same, but it smelled different. The bell above the door was still slightly off-center. The shelves had new names, new favorites. The man behind the counter wore thick glasses and a badge that said Leo, manager. She browsed slowly, heart loud in her chest. In the local authors section, she saw books by writers she once recommended to strangers with the shy reverence of a secret. And there, between a collection of Pacific Northwest essays and a self-published poetry chapbook, was her story, The Woman Who Watched Her Story Walk Away by Elaine. She opened it, ran her hand across the dedication, for those who lost themselves. Inside someone else, you were never lost. You were just waiting to return. She turned to the title page, took out her pen, and wrote, Olivia Lane. Then she tucked the signed copy into the shelf, just behind the facing one, a secret for whoever reached a little further. Later that night, as she stood at the podium in a small library annex filled with folding chairs and warm eyes, Olivia read aloud the first chapter. The room held its breath. When she finished, someone in the back whispered, "Thank you." And another said, "That was me." She smiled. It wasn't about Raina anymore. Not about theft. Not about applause. It was about the woman who had folded and dimmed and burned and lived. The next morning, a small alert lit her phone. Subject line, response from R. Adler Productions. She opened it. It was brief. Ms. Lane, we have received your legal documentation and will cease all distribution of the short film in question pending further proceedings. We will not contest the copyright ownership of the written content. No. Apology. But also no denial. Raina was silent, and that silence was louder than anything she'd ever said. Olivia stood on the same bridge where Raina had once kissed her. In the rain, years ago, she held a single copy of her book, not as a relic, but as a ritual. She flipped through it, looked at the ink, the sentences that once broke her and now rebuilt her. Then, gently, she tore out one page. The last one, she folded it in half, wrote a name on it, me, and let it fall into the river. Not as an ending, but as a release. In her cabin. Weeks later, she began her second book. Not about Raina, not about grief. This one started with joy. She loved her tea the way she loved her peace, steeped long enough to be strong. Because Olivia Lane was no longer a muse. She was the author, and this was the rewrite. The hotel smelled like orchids and ambition, the same downtown venue, same marble floors, same velvet chairs. But everything felt colder now, too manicured, like it had been bleached of memory. Olivia stood in the back, unnoticed, a single thread, stitched quietly into the seams of someone else's celebration. She wore a dark olive dress that hugged her softly but didn't shout. Her mother's ring glinted once beneath the overhead lights. In her hands, her own book. Slim brown paper. Cover, no blurbs. No fanfare. Just a single title etched in gold. The woman who watched her story walk away. She didn't sit. She didn't need to. The moderator took the stage with a clipped smile. Please welcome award-winning filmmaker, writer, and speaker Raina Vale. The room broke into applause. Raina walked out wearing pale silk and quiet power, hair slicked back, voice poised. She talked about storytelling, about truth and finding light in the margins, about how queer voices deserve space, attention. Legacy. Olivia listened to each word like a violinist listening to someone else play her melody, off-tempo, soulless, but hers nonetheless. Then came the question from the moderator, soft, casual. Was there someone in your life who inspired this film? Someone real? Raina's lips curled into a soft, practiced smile. We all have muses, she said. But none of this is autobiography. It's fiction, beautiful fiction. And that's when Olivia stepped forward. She didn't rush. She didn't tremble. Her heels echoed softly on the marble as heads began to turn. The moderator blinked. Ma'am? Olivia spoke clearly. I'm Olivia Lane. A hush. Raina's expression froze. That millisecond delay before control kicks in. And I wasn't your muse. Olivia continued, lifting her book, opening it to the page. I was your ghostwriter. Gasps scattered across the room like dominoes. One woman covered her mouth. A man's coffee cup rattled against the floor. Raina opened her mouth, but Olivia beat her to it. She pulled a weathered journal from her bag, the green leather-bound one Raina had taken and never returned. The one Olivia thought lost forever, until she saw it on Raina's coffee table during that last silent confrontation. She flipped it open. This is the paragraph that opened sky between us, Olivia said, voice steady, word for word. She read aloud. The exact phrasing. The rhythm. The original date, scribbled in her handwriting. The lines hung in the air like sacred dust. Raina looked stunned, then defensive. Those were drafts. You gave them to me. No, Olivia said. You took them. And you knew what you were doing. She turned to the moderator. I filed legal action this month. This is documentation. There will be no second film. She handed over a thin folder, dated entries, original poems, metadata. A full timeline of theft. The moderator stared at it, unsure whether to hold it like evidence or like a burning coal. Raina didn't speak again, because in this room, she had no script. Afterward, Olivia stood alone in the hallway. She didn't check her phone. Didn't call anyone. She didn't need applause or even closure. She just needed to breathe without holding someone else's name in her throat. Few women approached her, hesitantly at first. One was in her 40s, trembling. Your words, they helped me leave my partner. Another was barely 20, eyes wide and damp. I thought I was the only one. Thank you for saying it out loud. Olivia didn't cry. She just listened, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was listening to herself, too, that night. She walked across the Hawthorne Bridge, the same bridge where she and Raina once kissed beneath flickering streetlights. Their mouths wine-stained, their hands all fever dotted. It felt like a beginning. No, it felt like the final page. She took the advance copy of her book from her bag. She pressed her lips to the spine. Then gently, she let it fall into the river. It didn't sink with drama. It simply floated. Softly, slowly turning, like it was saying goodbye. Not as loss, but as release. She didn't destroy Raina. She didn't need to. She simply reclaimed the only thing that had ever been hers. Her voice.